welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Dan Rubin from Cleastreet. Dan, thank you very much for coming on. The Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by the Betfair Hub from Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you want expert articles from pro punters, from building automated models to betting psychology, check out the Betfair Hub. betfair.com.au/hub. Gamble responsibly. Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Dan Rubin from Cleastreet. Dan, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey Jake, thanks for having me.
No, this is going to be fun. There's plenty of areas I want to hit on. We'll see how we go timing-wise, but as always, background. Where did you start out in the world, and what led you, or was it always on the path to get involved in the sports, the betting space, and analytics?
Jake, that's a good question. My background is, first and foremost, I'm a huge sports fan. So growing up, I was that kid playing with baseball cards and basketball cards with my brothers and my dad, and it was always just a passion of mine. And never really got into sports betting, as a teenager. Besides, some fantasy football and March Madness pools. But I would say, really my sports analytics beginning came into my undergraduate days at UC San Diego. I was a management science major with an emphasis in econometrics, and I wrote my honors econometrics thesis on predicting how college basketball players would translate to the NBA. And, at that point, just using, mostly kind of simple regression type stuff is really my first introduction to that type of, those type of techniques. And I had a really, really great time doing it. After that, though, I kind of set it aside. I graduated in 2011, got a job in finance. I was working for a small valuation consulting firm in San Diego, working on their derivatives valuation practice. So a lot of complex, like embedded derivatives, and complex vesting terms for options and earnouts, and putting a price on those things. So my background's in finance. It was a passion. Sports were a passion. And it was just one of those things that over the last couple of years, I've started to put more of an emphasis on my sports analytics stuff than my finance.
Do a lot of these things come together? You already talked about the finance side, but even the paper you were talking about predicting college basketball players in the NBA. A lot of the things you've done over the years, have you found that they've come together well for what you're doing and focusing on more now? Or is it more that you pick up bits and pieces and eventually, you get to where you need to get to knowing a bunch of stuff, but there's only some parts of it that are really useful?
You kind of pick up bits and pieces. I'm always learning, and the models that I got to say, like the models that I've built 10 years ago, 5 years ago, when you look back now, they're pretty bad compared to where we are today. And not to say that we can't improve today. I'm consistently updating and trying new things, but yeah, you got to continually evolve and learn. And I'm a huge lifelong learner, and I went from the finance space, and I left that full time in beginning of 2018 to go back to school. So I went to business school, and I started doing more and more sports analytics stuff. So I was kind of I emphasized in analytics. I worked in the sports analytics group at Columbia, and I continue to learn, and my everything just kind of got better from there.
What do you think the mindset is towards analytics, let's say in the US? Because you and I are probably looking at this type of stuff all the time, and maybe we're too in the weeds to have a good answer, but I'm always interested in the temperature on whether it's something that we overvalue or we overstate, that everyone understands that analytics are probably better ways of evaluating things than the gut. Or do you still think we've got a long way to go when it comes to that? And in your experiences especially, you see that we're not even close to getting towards the tip of the sword?
That's a great question. I would say that analytics have played a huge role. If we want to talk in sports and kind of performance analytics, obviously they've come really far, and they still have a lot further to go. There's a ton more data than ever before with all kinds of player tracking stuff available, and techniques are more robust than ever. When I was an undergrad 10 years ago, we didn't you know, we weren't talking about data science. We weren't talking about machine learning. We weren't talking about neural networks and stuff like that. And all that stuff has come really far. I think the one thing to, my word of warning here though is that the analytics are limited. You can only model what you can observe, and I think at some point people get overconfident in their analytics. So, and it's not because the stuff can't be proven through analytics. It's because we may only observe a fraction of what's really going on, and we come up with projections based on those observations. And in reality, we're only looking through the light in a certain lens. So I think there's obviously, we've come far and there's ways to go, but we've got to be cognizant of the limitations for a particular model when it comes to these predictive analytics.
So within that line of thinking, then, I think that it would be nice for people to say, you know what, that is true. I'm going to go and learn about the psychology of gambling and gambling games and maybe apply that to what I'm doing, as well as modeling really well. And also maybe try and figure out, if I can, how to get better at the intuitive side of understanding sports or players or managers or coaches or whatever it might be. In reality, though, you've obviously got a background in finance, the higher education stuff and building this stuff in the real world. How easy is it, or how much time can you afford to spend on some of those other areas because you are aware of what your limitations are when it comes to the modeling?
It's interesting because, and I don't want to take too far of a tangent here, but um, the reality is people are humans, and humans have all kinds of biases, and they manifest themselves in different ways. And and when it comes to sports betting, we could quantify and measure these biases fairly well. So I recently, and I think we were going to talk about this at some point, so might as well bring it up now. I recently worked with Professor Mark Brody on a analytical project for a sports analytics course at Columbia, and we wrote a project on how how the biases of betting overs and betting on your home team manifest themselves in win totals. So before a season starts, and this is probably for someone who's done a lot of sports betting, you're probably well aware of this, but many people who haven't may not be. When you're looking at win totals markets, sports books know that they're going to get more action on the over than the under, and when you look at by region, you're going to get more action on the over for teams in that region. And as a result, they'll shade their lines up across the board. So, we'll call it win inflation or whatever you want. But, at the end of the day, there's 256 games in a NFL season. But if you look at the sum of all the win totals offered by a sportsbook, it's often way above 256, maybe 200, 260, 262. Who knows? It varies by book. But the reason that it's like that is because sportsbooks expect more action on the over, so they're going to shade their lines that way. And that's not something that I had to prove through rigorous analytics. It's just unnecessary. You can measure just by simply observing it, and really observing human behavior as well. That these biases even exist. So I guess that's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. That you're not going to just prove this out by analytics. You do something much simpler, but just be observant and cognizant of the various biases that people have.
So, on the topic of education, just more broadly and generally, before we hone in a little bit more on your time at Columbia, How much value add do you think higher education has provided you, especially versus the the alternative of building and failing and learning through actually doing? Do you think higher education is paramount to that entire process, or do you think these days, especially with what's possible and what's possible for free in many respects, it's losing, I guess, its power in that discussion?
It's there's a ton of free resources out there, and it depends what kind of learner you are. If you're that self starter that's going to, um, be able to teach yourself anything with a couple online courses, I don't know that it's necessary to get the same kind of analytical background and education that I have, um, by going to formal education. You could replace it with a lot these days. Um, I think where it does come in handy and where it's not irreplaceable, but where the real value add is through the relationships and the network effects of these higher education institutions. I mean, I've always been a big believer from undergrad through grad school that the biggest undervalued resource that uh, you have as a student are the professors. The professors are often incredibly bright, incredibly well connected, and incredibly respected. And these are just the type of folks that, they're in education because they genuinely like educating and helping students. And they're such a great resource, that you just might not be able to replace that aspect of it, by teaching yourself. But as far as the technical stuff, yeah, I'm sure you could do pretty well just with free or close to free resources online.
So, on the topic of professors, let's talk about Mark Brody for a moment. Many will know he is the godfather of golf analytics, let's say, and obviously strokes gained and many things that he's brought to the table over the years. Were you able to dabble into, and I don't know if you want to go into specifics, but were you able to dabble in some of the more betting focused stuff? Were you looking at analytics generally when you were working, with and alongside him, or take us through your experience being able to get access to the caliber of person and obviously with his track record in the space?
Yeah, so with Mark, I, t- I took Mark's class, sports analytics. He teaches sports analytics and a couple others at Columbia, and I took his course summer of 2018. Um, it was, I mean, it was within weeks of PASPA getting repealed, so the timing was pretty remarkable. His course was about 80-90% just pure sports analytics with about 10%, maybe 20%, sports betting. So it was mostly performance analytics, um, everything from individual performance to team performance, um, you name it, across many sports. After taking the course, I started to develop a relationship with Mark, and he asked me to be his TA in the fall 18 for his sports analytics course, and I was thrilled that he asked me, so I obviously did it. And at that point, we started to be able to, you know, work outside of class. Not I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone that, I felt like he kind of opened up to help me out with some of my own modeling stuff, some ideas, and just to be honest, being a sounding board for some of the ideas that you have. I mean, you might think you have a great idea, and it's just awesome to have someone that can poke holes in it for you. So our relationship kind of grew after that. I helped him this summer, with some new materials for his course, and helped. He kind of brought me in to help the students on occasion this summer. So the relationship's kind of grown, and he's just a great person, great analyst, but even a better person. So I'm fortunate that I've met and grown to know Mark.
How many similar types of people do you lean on? Is it a number? Is it double digits? Is it just a handful? Is it one or two when it comes to, I guess, growing your own acumen in the modeling space, whether it comes to sports betting or generally in analytics? Is it a wide swath of people that you can rely on and lean on, or is this a very small small world where there are only a handful of folks that are going to be able to provide and add value for you?
I think there's a lot of folks out there. I don't have a huge network in the sports analytics space, to be completely honest. I've got, I think it's I could count the number on one hand or maybe two hands. There's a lot of great people out there, and there's a lot of people providing, great content. And I think people are generally open to helping out. I haven't been in the space long enough to really forge that many relationships. So I would say my network in the sports analytics space is far smaller than probably some other guests you've had on here.
So let's talk about the modeling then. Do you have any guiding principles when it comes to modeling these sports? Let's just say baseball, for example. What are some of the things that you're able to share that you value as you approach the modeling with an obvious focus towards betting the outcomes on these?
So, and not to sound cliche, but and you probably get this a lot, but the number one thing you have to think about is separating performance from outcome. And baseball is a great example of, if you're a starting pitcher and you go 4 1/3 innings and you leave, the bases loaded when you leave the game. If those Randers get stranded, your guy comes in, your relief pitcher comes in after you and strands those runners, you don't get charged any runs, any earned runs. But if the reliever, lets those guys score through any various ways, you're going to get charged earned runs. So earned runs are a terrible metric because you could have the same pitcher, depending on what the guy following him does, depends whether or not you're charged earned runs or not. So that's a terrible metric. So getting more granular than that, you want to, maybe say, well, how many hits, how many bases, you know, what else, what happened in the game, and beyond that, you want to go even more granular if you could, to say, well, how hard did they hit the ball against him? What was the launching? What was the exit velocity? Maybe that allows you to control for factors outside of the player's control, such as the wind or the outfield dimensions. So it's really about getting as granular as you can get when assessing performance. And I love baseball because it's a great sport to do that. I love basketball as well, but I don't do much in predictive analytics for basketball because it's frankly harder to separate performance from outcome. There's 100 and I don't know how many 110 possessions in an NBA game these days. So if you're looking at some sort of points per possession metric, the team with higher points per possession is gonna generally win the game. So it's harder to separate. So I've tried to focus my efforts in where it seems to me, at least, that there's a big gap between underlying performance and outcome. That's where I like to spend my time usually.
How much of your approach to analytics is about the granularity then? Or do you need to have as well some form of zoom out function to go with it so that you're not too in the weeds all the time?
Yeah, you obviously need to zoom out. I like to say that there are people who do way more complex modeling than I do. I try to keep things simple, intentionally. I'm not a big fan of black box models, just because it makes it harder for me to diagnose when something's going wrong, and it's easier for me to assess model biases with a simpler model. So I think that latter point, the model biases, is really important. It's great to have a model that's incredibly predictive and incredibly accurate. But if it exhibits certain biases, whether that be at the tail end of a distribution or in certain scenarios, that's going to cause you problems. And it's at least in my opinion, it's really helpful to be able to kind of take a step back and say, all right, where does this model exhibit biases? Where Can it be improved? And you sometimes, if you're too deep in the weeds, you just can't see it. So you do have to, take your head out of the sand once in a while and check on that kind of stuff.
How far ahead of Jake at home on the couch talking about ERA are you trying to get, or how much more accurate are you trying to get when you talk about getting more granular? Or how far advanced do you need to be to make what you're doing, much more usable than just me at home sitting on the couch, if you know what I'm trying to say?
You need to get down to the player level data, to the event data. Kind of forget about runs. To be honest, you got to get a little bit more granular than that. So there's a bit of work to do to get there. And like I said, I think there are people out there with more complex and even more precise models than I have. I definitely believe that. But a model can get you so far, but there's the other side of the coin to betting and to betting profitably that comes down to just getting the best price and understanding how to bet. So the fundamental fundamentally the fundamental analysis and predictive analytics is really only half the coin when it comes to betting profitably.
Do you find sports get more boring for you when you're applying a lot of this stuff? I mean, I've found it to be the case sometimes when, I'll watch, especially NFL or college football, and I'll see something and I'll go back to an analytical metric or measure for something and then discard it, let's say, or not apply as much value on it. Do you find yourself similarly, either as a fan or as a bettor, or do you think that, it's a better way to watch games, it's a better way to absorb the sporting contests that are happening?
I may be in the minority, but I enjoy the additional analytics around sports. And when I watch a game, I'm always thinking in terms of, hey, that was a great play, but this was a lucky play. He hit the ball hard, but it went straight to the third baseman. That, no fault of the batter. So I'm kind of in my mind already allocating various kind of merits across different players as I watch the game. So it doesn't deter it. It's not a deterrent for me to kind of think about analytics in sports when I watch. Again, I may be in the minority there because I could talk to a bunch of people and they'd probably disagree and they just want to sit back and have a beer and watch the game, which I do as well. Don't get me wrong, but I think the analytics behind sports is fascinating.
Would you prefer not knowing anything about baseball in order to simply make your models better or get closer to perfection, or do you think the intimate knowledge of baseball is an added advantage, is an added factor, and even though there might be some things that you can't unlearn or untangle in your mind that might be negative, overall it's clearly a positive?
It's a net positive. It's a net positive. I don't have a ton to say there other than as you watch a game, you observe and you start to learn things. You learn about tendencies of players. You learn about bad base running decisions and stuff like that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on if you didn't understand the game. You could start to understand the magnitude of mistakes by players or bad plays that you wouldn't have a firm understanding of if you didn't know the sport well. So I think it's a net positive. Of course, there's things that you're going to have biases, and it's just you got to be aware of them. But I don't really try to analyze something that I don't at least have a basic understanding of.
Tell me a little bit about the betting side. Where did you start out? Let's say through high school, through university, and into career and education. Were you at a point where you clearly understood what the lines and spreads were, totals were, all the derivatives were, and you're in a decent spot? Or has that evolved a fair bit for you? Have you spent much time digging into some of those things? And obviously outside of the mathematical component that I'm sure you're pretty across from your finance days. But what about just betting markets in general and approaching the betting side?
I think the basics of betting I learned pretty early. I mean, I remember being 10 years old on family vacations to Las Vegas, and my dad leaving the sheet, the sportsbook betting sheet in the hotel room, and he would let us pick a game each. I have three brothers. He'd say, "All right, you guys each can pick a game for $20," and I understood what a spread was when I was 10 years old. Um, this team has to win by this many points, or if you pick the bad team, hopefully they can keep it close, right? So I understood that. I understood the money line, all that stuff. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, as I started to do more and more betting. I started to understand the nuances better. I started to understand, just how important, if over a large sample size, getting the best prices. I started to understand how correlation plays a factor in certain bet types and parlays and such. I started to understand how different half point, the value of a half point, and how that differs by sport and by bet type. Um, and I really just started to think about outcomes and games as a as just a point on a very wide distribution of potential outcomes. So I think that's where my thinking has evolved. As far as bet types, I knew what a parlay was when I was a teenager. Um, did I know? I generally knew how it was priced. I know how it's priced now, obviously, quite well. Um, and I know how to, calculate expected returns probably better than I could when I was a teenager. But um, but yeah, I mean, you pick up little things, you pick up some nuances. But I had a pretty, at least fundamental knowledge of the betting markets as a pretty early age.
So finance, career, professional betting, building something like Cleastreet, plenty of different options for you. Tell us a little bit about the factors that go into those types of decisions, those types of paths that obviously, many of them open to you. What sort of philosophy do you have when it comes to those decisions?
Well, I spent about 8 years in the finance space, um, starting from an analyst all the way up to a vice president running our complex derivatives business at my old firm. And along the way, got a chartered financial analyst designation. And then at some point, I was curious. I was curious to try something else. I knew what this space was. I'd worked in it for 8 years, and I just wanted to try something new. So I went back to school. Honestly, going to business school was not part of my plan. I never really thought about it until maybe a year or two, maybe a year before I applied. But I wanted to learn. I wanted to try something new. I thought I had the opportunity to get into a really good program, so I said, "What the heck?" And once I got into the program, it was my full intention to do something entrepreneurial coming out. I didn't know what it was exactly. I couldn't tell you that I was hope back in 2017 that I was going to go to business school, come out and become a professional sports bettor or run a sports betting you know media company. Um, that was never part of the planned path. It just kind of happened. But I will tell you that um, being able my experience in the finance space and the credentials that I got over the years gave me the confidence to do something more entrepreneurial. I don't think I would have had the confidence to do this, when I was in my early 20s. But I know now that I've built up a career in the finance space that if I ever want to go back in that direction, I think there's going to be a door that opens. So, you know, I I like to think, your capital. comprises of, as an individual, of your human capital and your financial capital. Well, I worked really hard to build up my human capital over the last, 30 years of my life, and it allows me to be a little bit more, risk seeking with my financial capital. So, um, so that's what I'm doing. So I'm you know, betting quite a bit. I've launched this company called Cleastreet, which is, trying to just educate sports bettors and provide sports betting, good, intelligent sports betting content. And that's what I'm working on now. And that's I that's what I hope to continue working on, at least for a while. I don't have any plans to do anything else for now.
So you probably had different options within the entrepreneurial sports betting space, let's say. Building live odds models to try and sell to bookmakers, or selling picks, or whatever it might be. What do you think drove you to the Cleastreet path, and what parts of that excite you the most?
When I kind of grew through my finance career, I started as an analyst, and then you move on to manager, and then you start managing a team, and then you start getting even bigger, and at some point your responsibilities include business development and sales, and you know that involves you going to try and sell something. So you got to sell a service, and to be honest, over my 8 years, that was the worst part of the job for me. I didn't like sales. I didn't like the feeling to have to sell something to someone else. Um, it's just it's just not something that I was really ever very comfortable with. I don't know why, but I just enjoyed the analytics stuff. So and I enjoyed teaching. As we spoke earlier, before we started recording, Jake, as I was telling you, you know, really enjoyed, doing the stuff at Columbia. Some of the guest lecturing I've done in the past, and the finance space, I really enjoyed. And so I enjoyed, you know, something kind of in the education space, and I loved analytics. And so I wanted to build something that didn't rely on sales, and I could just lean on the part of the job that I like. So I decided, let's build some analytical stuff, and the best way to profit is to just bet this stuff ourselves. I've over the last 5-6 years, we've been making some money, and that just kept growing, and uh, it kind of relieves me of that responsibility to try and sell anything the way I'm doing things now. So that's honestly the whole reason that I chose this type of business.
Do you think the Cleastreet path is pretty clear and defined, and is obvious, or is it something that is ever evolving, and could morph into a few different things, and follow a few different paths?
It's hard to tell. I mean, we got our irons and a couple fires right now. We've obviously I have a partner, and the two of us, we've got our betting models, and that's providing us sufficient cash flow to try and do some other things. Um, so betting's kind of our cash cow right now. I think there's an opportunity in the sports betting content space to provide something that's a little bit more analytical, independent, um, and just a different kind of a different voice than what's currently out there. So I've been doing a lot of writing, and filling up the website with some content, building out the newsletter, which I think people genuinely like. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they click on and open it but don't like it. But and then we've been building an app because why not? To be honest, I think it was one of those things that I think we're just trying to build something that we would use. So we've got a development team working on a consumer app to help you track your bets, and some other bells and whistles, which I know there's a bunch of tools out there, but it's something that I think is important for people to do, and so it didn't cut cost us a ton of money to get it done. So we figured let's build it as a tool for people to have. So yeah, we're kind of scattered. We've got all kinds of things, several things going on, and I don't know which one's gonna take off, if any. But I know that the path we're on and the money we're able to make just in the betting markets allow us to try and play around with some things. So and I'm happy about that. So we'll see where it takes us. I don't really know.
So the sports betting area is a beast. It can be many, many things. When a family friend comes up to you and says, maybe not these days, but back when we're allowed to see other people, let's say, Dan, oh, you're involved in sports betting. That's cool. I heard about DraftKings or whatever. What parts of sports betting entirely do you focus on, or do you like to talk about, or do you think about? Is it the content education space, or are there other areas? Whether it's the bookmaking side, whether it's more on the sports betting side. What are some of the things that you like to address, and potentially things down the line that might interest you?
I think the education space is big. So I take pride in that. Both my parents are educators. So I take pride in being able to help other people, and share knowledge. I think there's too many paywalls up these days. I'm probably going to offend some listeners by saying that, but um, I think yeah, there's some things that you want to keep to yourself, but I think there's a lot of information out there that could do a lot of people a lot of good. That's not necessarily going to harm you. I mean, like, I don't think I'm harming my ROI by teaching people proper bankroll management. Um, that's not hurting me in any way. So I'd love to help people to learn that stuff. So the education part is pretty important to me. And then just the I guess the 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 intersection of finance and sports is pretty neat, and sports betting in particular is pretty neat to me. I like to I love to see how some financial institutions are starting to get into the space, and you could kind of think of a wager as a financial security of sorts. I all my kind of days pricing options and various securities make me think of the securitization of betting instruments. Um, I think there's a lot of cool things that people could do there. I haven't really focused any of my efforts there, but I'm always very interested to see what people are thinking of, whether it be you know I don't know. There's a million things you could do with derivatives, and pricing and pricing games. So I think that's the other space that is interesting to me. Just the kind of securitization and potential, kind of how sports bets might mimic financial instruments in the future. I think people are doing some cool stuff in that space.
Yeah, no doubt. So 25-year-old listening to this who hears your current path you're on and thinks, that's me, I want to do that. 1 to 3 years into job out of university, let's say, avid sports fan, very interested in betting, gets your newsletter and so on and so forth. Is it the right path for him? Have you had enough time in this space to figure out if it's something that many entrepreneurs should be looking at, or do they follow your more traditional path, let's say, of a fair bit of time in finance or fair bit of time in other areas, and then ply their trade on the side, or go full time whenever they feel ready to jump?
Oof, that's a tough one. I mean, it took me a while to be confident enough to jump. Um, so it's different for each person. I understand that there's liquidity issues in the sports betting space. Like, it's not something that just scales overnight. You can't just assume because you have a model that wins at a 4% ROI that you can raise a bunch of money and start betting you know $500,000 a game. It just doesn't work like that. There's I guess structural components of the industry in place that prohibit you from doing such things. So those challenges are real. So I would just tell people to be mindful of those. that you're not going to just discover the holy grail of the uncorrelated asset class that you can scale up and sell to people. I just don't think the markets are that deep to handle that. So that's it's tough to say. I think I would. It comes down to an individual. I mean, if you get to the point where like if it's an obsession for you, in a healthy way, a healthy obsession that you just are extremely passionate about, I would say, um, give it a shot. But if you're just looking for a quick way to make money and you think it's an easy way to make money, it's not that either. I mean, it's not super easy. It takes a lot of work. There's some tedious parts of the job as well, so it's not just all fanfare and going to the Super Bowl and watching games. It's there's definitely some work involved, and you're really grinding for that paycheck a little bit more than it might seem. So I don't know. It depends on the individual. So that's not a great answer, but it's all I can really say.
So two final points for you. One, what's the easiest way for people to get the newsletter that we've been referring to a couple of times? And two, what can we expect to be the user experience on Cleastreet on the app, let's say in 12 or 18 months from now? What are your expectations for that?
So the easiest way to get on the newsletter is just go to Cleastreet, the website. So we have a couple different URLs. Cleastreet.us is probably the easiest one. You can go there, just pop in an email address. Everything's free. We're not trying to charge people for any of that. So what you can expect on that newsletter is right now, especially during baseball season, it's a daily newsletter with some of the bets that we're placing. We'll tell you what we're betting, what odds we're looking to bet it at, what percentage of our bankroll we're betting on it. And then we sprinkle some other content in there, some educational pieces and stuff like that. I guess the user experience 18 months from now. So we've been developing the Cleastreet app. We've been testing it for the last couple weeks. Hopefully we'll release it in the next month or so. On there right now, on the kind of beta version, is a way to just track your own bets, follow the games. We'll be posting our picks on there. We've had some conversations with some other analysts that once we properly vet, we may include some other analyst picks, so to say. And then the ability to shop odds. I mean, get the best price is fundamental to everything we're doing here. So we'll have live odds feed from several different sports books around the world. So that's all kind of on what's built thus far. We're thinking about additional features, building out chat rooms to have a little bit more of a sense of community on there. Couple other features. I'd love to be able to just be the one-stop destination where you can you shop for the odds, you find the bet you want to place, and just click right through to the sports book to make the bet. So that's probably down the road, maybe 12 months. So we'll see. I think that's what people can expect generally, and we got a lot of things we're working on. So and to be honest, we're just trying to create the best product out there that people want and need. So any feedback that we can get, we absolutely are appreciative. So it's all a trial and error process. We get feedback on the newsletter all the time, and if people say I like this, I don't like that, we're pretty quick to change and just try to make improvements. So it's fun because we don't know exactly where it's going to take us, but we're just trying to provide something that helps people and they enjoy. So hopefully, as long as we keep our ears open, we should hopefully be able to create a net positive for people. So that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Dan, it's been a pleasure chatting. It's great to hear your story and what's going on now and an insight into the future. So thanks for coming on the podcast, and look forward to checking back in later on and seeing where it's all at.
Yeah, thanks, Jake, and thanks for having me. I mean, I've been a big fan of the podcast over the years, and it's an honor for you to have me. So I thank you very much.